Hello and welcome to another weekend vlog. This weekend we were up to some very exciting stuff as we could at last put to use an old beam from a barn that we had collected a couple of years ago. Also lucky enough to have a helping hand from Agnes's dad, which is always appreciated. As part of our renovation upstairs, we wanted to conceal the not so pretty beam in the ceiling with an exposed rustic looking one. There was some small stuff that needed to get done in preparation before we could fetch the beam, like adding a vertical supporting stud which will support the weight at the far end. In the workshop we then set about notching out the shape of the roof beam so that the new one could snuggle up tightly into it. After a couple of passes with the circular saw and then the extra big circular saw, Magnus used a couple of wedges, a crowbar and some welly to release the cutout from the beam. It was then time to get the rustic beam upstairs. Magnus and his dad lifted up the beam onto the balcony, and then we had to thread it through all the temporary supports we had to the far end of our lounge, and there was luckily just enough space to manoeuvre and lift the beam up onto the temporary horizontal supports Magnus had put up to make the install easier. Well, I have to say I was pretty impressed by this little setup and how easy Magnus and his dad made it look. Once it was up, they worked on the beam vertically and horizontally together, slowly banking it into place onto the supporting stud in the wall. On Sunday, I was back to the woodshed to do a little bit more wood stacking of the firewood Magnus had split a couple of weeks ago. I had actually set the goal to have this woodshed fully stacked before the end of summer, and here we are in late autumn still stacking away. I'm not going to lie, but getting the balance between all the chores and the projects is not easy, but I think at least it's better to do a little here and there when I can. And whilst I worked on that, Magnus was on to the next chore on the list, fixing his mini Jeep, where he fixed the tension on his gas pedal. Then teamed up again to put up some blocks in the fascia board for the gutter that I had pre-painted. For those of you who have seen our previous videos, you will have seen how we found a major issue with part of our foundation that had been damaged and moved from frost damage. This I have worked out is partly due to there being no gutters on the back side of the house, which meant that during the very wet autumn last year, the high groundwater which froze pushed out the foundation wall. Now this is done, I just need to buy some gutter supports and a metal drip edge. I then did a quick clean of our steps that had become an algae slip zone before we were on to the biannual task of changing both our cars over to the winter tyres. And by the evening we were on to the more enjoyable and fun part of removing all the temporary supports, whilst also adding one temporary double supporting stud. We have had so many temporary supports up for ages, with one for each truss, that I had forgotten what the space actually looked like. It was just so amazing to see each one to be taken away and to get a feel for how the space is going to be. And for those of you who have an eye for detail, you may have noticed that we have a very interesting looking log hanging from the ceiling in the workshop. This log is going to be incorporated into this project along with many other exciting plans that Magnus has. So if you would like to follow along on our renovation journey, please hit the subscribe button. Thank you so much for watching and bye for now.